The Qattara Depression is one of the most extreme places on Earth. It lies in western Egypt and drops almost 426 feet below sea level. The harshest conditions rule here. Temperatures rise to 122 degrees Fahrenheit. There is practically no rainfall, and the land itself looks scorched and dead. And it is precisely here that Egypt is going to do something that sounds almost insane: to turn the desert into a sea. The area of the future body of water is supposed to be about 5,400 square miles. To understand the scale, it is almost like Lake Ontario, one of the largest lakes in North America. The footage will be spectacular, the tourists inevitable, but the spectacle is far from the main thing here. This project is conceived as an answer to several key problems of the country at once: energy production, the creation of a gigantic natural battery, new sources of water. All of this can become reality thanks to one artificial sea in the heart of the Sahara, and it seems Egypt really stands on the threshold of radical change. When European cartographers first studied the Qattara Depression, they saw in it not a useless emptiness, but a giant bowl as if created for water. That is how an idea appeared that even today sounds daring: to create an inland sea in the Sahara. They first began talking about this back in the 19th century, in an era when engineers were both technicians and romantics. It was assumed that part of the desert could be flooded, the climate could be changed, rains could be induced, and the sands could be turned into agricultural lands. For Europe of that time, projects like this seemed almost like magic, as if humanity had learned to command nature. But the first calculations quickly cooled the enthusiasm. Digging a canal from the Mediterranean Sea was too expensive. Even the richest powers did not dare to invest in such a risky experiment. After the Second World War, humanity once again believed in technical omnipotence. It seemed you could turn rivers, raise land, or flood a desert. The only question was will. In the 50s and 60s, Egypt returned to the idea of a canal again, but this time another problem surfaced. The area of the future work turned out to be literally stuffed with mines and unexploded shells left after the battles at El Alamein. Hundreds of thousands of munitions were hidden under the sand. Even simple reconnaissance of the terrain was deadly dangerous. Large-scale earthworks, all the more so. Add to this the extreme heat, loose soils, and constant winds. The project was again judged too risky and too expensive. In the 70s, engineers from the United States and Europe proposed a radical solution. If you cannot dig, then you need to blast. And not with ordinary charges, but with nuclear ones. The plan looked staggering. It was proposed to use 213 nuclear charges with a yield of 1.5 megatons each. That is hundreds of times greater than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. A series of explosions was supposed to cut a gigantic canal through which the waters of the Mediterranean Sea would rush into the desert. On paper, everything looked spectacular. In a matter of weeks, the desert turns into a sea, and new cities appear along the shores. But reality turned out to be much darker. Military experts immediately pointed out catastrophic consequences. Radioactive contamination could affect not only Egypt but also neighboring countries, all the way to southern Europe. In addition, no one could guarantee that the canal would not collapse or would not vanish into the sand. The idea was recognized as too dangerous even by the standards of the Cold War. Over time, it became clear neither nuclear explosions nor gigantic canals across the surface of the desert would work. Too dangerous, too expensive, and too unpredictable. But the idea itself did not go anywhere. It was simply waiting for the moment when technology would catch up to ambition. In the new century, engineers proposed a different approach. If the desert does not allow passage on the surface, then you need to go under it. That is how the concept of a tunnel was born. It must run deep under the sands, where there is no wind, no scorching sun, and no minefields. Underground, water will not evaporate, and the surface of the Sahara will remain untouched. Only the entrance and exit of the tunnel will need to be cleared. Everything else will be handled by machines. And today, this is no longer theory. Modern tunnel-boring complexes are capable of advancing dozens of feet a day, passing through salt, chalk and sand. They simultaneously drill the rock and reinforce the walls with concrete rings. It is precisely such machines that have turned many underground projects from fantasy into routine. It is also important that Egypt has real experience with such work. The Cairo Metro was built using tunnel boring machines in soils very similar to those that lie in the area of the Qattara Depression. In addition, the country has already implemented several extremely complex projects under the Suez Canal, road and rail tunnels. All of this work was carried out in conditions of high temperature, difficult geology, and unstable soils. Therefore, the idea of a tunnel to the Qattara Depression today is perceived not as an adventure, but as an engineering task with understandable parameters. The distance from the Mediterranean Sea to the depression is from 34 to 50 miles, depending on the route. The depression itself lies about 426 feet below sea level. This means that water can flow there naturally under the force of gravity without pumps. One end of the tunnel will open into the Mediterranean Sea, the other into the dry bottom of the desert. After the gate is opened, water will begin to gradually fill the depression, forming a huge lake in the center of the Sahara. To eliminate the risk of uncontrolled flooding, the water level is planned to be held at roughly 197 feet below sea level. This will create a stable body of water, not too deep, but truly enormous. Number 9. If the project is implemented, a sea comparable in area to Lake Ontario in North America will appear in the desert. What for decades existed only on paper is gradually turning into a real plan. But the main value of this sea is not in its size and not in spectacular landscapes. The key is energy. Falling water is one of the most reliable sources of energy, and in the case of the Qattara Depression, the drop in elevation becomes the main resource. Water will enter through the tunnel, rushing downward and spinning turbines. The principle is the same as at a hydroelectric power plant on a river, but instead of a dam, the desert itself works here. A drop of 426 feet is comparable to the fall of a river from a height of more than 2 Niagara Falls. Such head pressure makes it possible to generate colossal volumes of electricity. At the same time, the system remains controllable. The flow can be regulated, increased, or reduced depending on the needs of the grid. The special feature of the project is that it is practically continuous. As soon as water reaches the depression, it begins to evaporate actively because of the heat. The water level drops, and the system automatically draws in a new portion from the Mediterranean Sea. A closed cycle is created. Water comes in, generates energy, evaporates, and a new portion arrives in its place. The hotter it is, the more active the evaporation, and the more powerful the flow. According to engineers' calculations, the Qattara system can deliver from 600 to 1,200 megawatts of power. Per year, this is from 4 to 7 billion kilowatt hours of electricity. That is enough to supply electricity to several large cities at once. And the main thing is that this energy does not depend on seasons. Rivers can dry up, water levels can change, but here everything is subject to calculation. The flow is regulated, the system is manageable, and evaporation only strengthens the effect. In fact, the desert itself maintains the station's operation. But the engineers went even further. They proposed using the sea not only as a source of energy, but also as a way to store it. The project predismarched the creation of an additional reservoir located higher than the level of the Qattara Depression. It will be connected to the main body of water and will work as a gigantic energy storage system. During the day, when solar power plants generate the maximum electricity, the surplus will be directed to pumping water from the depression up into the upper reservoir. At night, when consumption increases, the water will go back down, pass through the turbines, and again provide energy. In this way, the system turns into a water battery. It smooths peak loads, compensates for drops in solar and wind generation, and supports the stability of the power grid. According to specialists' calculations, with an elevation difference of more than 300 feet, the volume of stored energy can reach millions of kilowatt hours. For a country with growing electricity demand, this is critically important. But electricity here is not an end in itself. Egypt plans to use it to solve the most painful problem: the shortage of fresh water. The hydropower of the Qattara Depression must supply desalination plants. Seawater will be turned into drinking water without burning gas and oil. What previously required fuel will now be able to run on clean energy born in the desert. According to specialists' estimates, if the entire energy potential of the project is directed to desalination, it will be possible to obtain up to 396 billion gallons of fresh water per year. This will not replace the Nile, which gives the country about 14.6 trillion gallons annually, but even such volumes can change the situation. This water can go to irrigating fields, supplying arid regions and providing for millions of people. Every litre obtained in this way reduces the burden on the Nile. Large bodies of water always affect the surrounding environment. Scientists talked about this back in the 19th century. Water increases air humidity, softens the heat, reduces the number of dust storms, and decreases temperature swings between day and night. Around the Qattara Sea, green zones may begin to form. Where today there is only sand, shrubs will appear, and then trees. In essence, new oases. And together with water, people will come. Today, the Qattara Depression is emptiness. But if a sea appears, Egypt will gain a coastline more than 124 miles long. Beaches, fishing settlements, piers, roads, tourist infrastructure. The Egyptian economy is largely held up by tourism. Right now, the main flows are directed to the pyramids, the Red Sea, and the Sinai Peninsula. A new coast in the center of the Sahara will open a completely different direction. These are not just beautiful views, these are jobs, business, the development of regions that were previously considered hopeless. The appearance of a sea in the desert opens another opportunity: fish farming. In brackish water, it is possible to breed species that adapt well to such conditions. That means food, jobs, and exports. Where today there is nothing, a stable economy can appear. Thousands of families will get work, and the country will get an additional source of food. But no less important is something else. Egypt is catastrophically overpopulated along the Nile. Practically all of the country's life is concentrated in a narrow strip of land. Any new territory suitable for living is worth its weight in gold here. The Qattara Depression can become not just a body of water, but a new region. A place where real resettlement of people beyond the overloaded Nile Valley begins. There is also an effect that is talked about less often. If part of the water of the Mediterranean Sea gradually goes into the Qattara Depression, the pressure on the Nile Delta may decrease a little. This means that coastal agricultural lands will suffer less from sea level rise. An artificial sea not only creates new territories, but also helps preserve those already developed. Egypt solves two tasks at once. It expands the space for life and protects what it already has. Behind this whole picture stands a harsh reality. Egypt urgently needs energy. Today, about 90% of all electricity in the country is produced at gas power plants. The economy literally depends on gas. At the same time, its own reserves are gradually being depleted and consumption is growing rapidly. Over the last 10 years, electricity use has increased by almost 50%. Every summer, when air conditioners run at full capacity, the power system is on the verge of overload. To avoid outages, Egypt is forced to import more and more gas. This costs the country billions of dollars and hits the budget hard. In 2023, almost 88% of electricity was produced from fossil fuels. Gas is an unstable resource. Its price changes, supplies depend on the political situation, and domestic production no longer covers internal demand. In such a situation, energy independence stops being an abstract idea and becomes a matter of security. The shortage of electricity hits not only comfort, it affects everything at once. Factories stop, pumps do not deliver water to the fields, hospitals switch to diesel generators. In conditions of extreme heat, power outages turn into a threat to life. Farmers lose crops, enterprises incur losses, the economy begins to slow down. This is a vicious circle: expensive gas, unstable electricity, a drop in production. That is why Egypt is looking for sources of energy that do not depend on imports and political decisions. Sun, wind, and now, a sea in the desert. It is important to understand, Egypt is not starting from zero. Over the last decades, the country has already implemented projects that were once considered impossible. In the 90s, the government came to the conclusion that relying only on the Nile was no longer possible. In the most lifeless regions, they began drilling ultra-deep wells. Some went down to a depth of up to 6 miles. Thus, the Nubian sandstone aquifer system was brought into use, an ancient underground reservoir that is hundreds of thousands of years old. This water is often compared to oil, only transparent. It is raised by powerful pumps, and fields appear where there was desert. Today, almost 500,000 acres of land are under irrigation. Wheat, corn, potatoes. All of this is grown where previously there was only dust. If extracting groundwater proved that the desert can be revived, then the Toshka project became an attempt to repeat this success on an industrial scale. It is unofficially called the Second Nile. The essence of the project is simple and at the same time daring. Take water from Lake Nasser and direct it far into the heart of the desert. For this, a very powerful pumping station was built, and then a network of canals with a length of almost 155 miles. The goal is to develop more than 1 million fedans of land, that is, about 1 million acres. When the project was just being launched, critics said it was doomed. Too expensive, too hot, too far from population centers. But Egypt did not back down. Today, tens of thousands of acres are already being cultivated. Here they grow not only wheat and corn, but also fruits, dates, olives. The state builds roads, power lines, housing, and schools. In essence, a new residential zone is forming in the very center of the desert. And what is especially important, this project reduces the load on the Nile Valley, where the population density has long reached critical levels. It is precisely in this context that the idea of a sea in the Qattara Depression takes on special meaning. Egypt understands. The Nile is irreplaceable. But it can no longer be the only support. An artificial sea will not solve all problems at once, it will not replace the river, but it will give the country energy that does not depend on its flow. This energy can be directed to desalination, to infrastructure, to supporting the economy in critical moments. Every megawatt obtained in the desert is less pressure on the Nile. Every cubic meter of fresh water obtained from the sea is a step toward greater independence. The history of Egypt is the history of a struggle for water and energy. But today, the country is increasingly turning natural limitations into tools of development. Sun, wind, and even the heat of the Sahara become resources. The Qattara Depression is a challenge accepted consciously. The project is complex, expensive, and risky. But for Egypt, it is not an experiment for the sake of spectacular footage. It is an attempt to ensure stability in a world where familiar sources are no longer guaranteed. Today, the Qattara Depression remains a desert bowl, but if the plans are implemented, a sea will appear here that never existed. A coastline in the center of the Sahara, a source of energy, water, and new territories. Perhaps in a few decades, people will look at the map of Africa and be surprised. How was it even possible to live without this sea?